So let's begin with a prayer. In the name of, I guess I should stand in front of them. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Heavenly King, Comforter, the Spirit of truth, present in all places and filling all things, treasure of blessings and giver of life, come and abide within us, cleanse our souls, and save us, O good one. Christ, O Lord, we ask that you bless us this evening with your presence, that you may illumine our minds and hearts to the light of your gospel, instilling in us reverence for your commandments, that having conquered sinful desires, we may live spiritual lives pleasing to you. For you are the light of our souls and bodies, and to you we give glory to the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So we are primarily working with this book. Spiro in the back has copies if you want one. They're only $10. And please see him. And I don't see Chris. We have a book for someone else. This is just a book everyone should own. It's Great Lent by Father Schmemann. And it's just a fantastic guide to what Great Lent is about. And there's quite a bit in here about fasting. So I'm drawing from it tonight in tonight's class. And of course, Father Evan's book, The Spiritual Toolkit on Fasting. So whenever we talk about one thing, like fasting as a separate topic, it's really important to see the whole picture of where it fits in the life of the church. I could just tell you right now, fasting's not eating meat and a vegan diet, and we're supposed to do it certain times of the year. But that would not at all begin to unveil sort of how the church historically, biblically understands this act of fasting. And I have to say, within our tradition, we're the only ones who've kept it. Even the only remnant of like the Wednesday, Friday, the weekly fast that we still practice in the Orthodox Church. Catholicism has Ash Wednesday, and that's it. And that's the extent of a fast. So why has the church not abandoned it, the Eastern Orthodox not abandoned it, and what is its place within the whole? And I kind of went out of order in the book. So he has almsgiving and then fasting. But I feel the progression is really prayer, fasting, almsgiving, that even those three tools work together, and one opens sort of the door to the other. Prayer and fasting are very much connected. And the fruit of a life of prayer and fasting is almsgiving, is the enlarging of our hearts, the opening up of our hearts to the other. And so there are tools to get us there. So he does connect them, but I'm just going to go in that order. And also he starts, I just say fasting is about changing our hearts, right? It's not a spiritual diet. It's really about an inner transformation of the heart when it meets the living God. That's the purpose of our fasting, to be changed by our encountering Christ. That's the whole purpose of it. So unfortunately, we tend to minimalize, reduce things to elements that have nothing to do with it. The idea of giving something up. What are you giving up for Lent? Well, I'm giving up chocolate. Then I'd ask the question, well, why? Are you worshiping chocolate? Is your whole life about chocolate? Is it marring your vision of God? Well, then maybe you should give it up. But is it because you just like it and you want to make a sacrifice for God? Okay, well, I guess there's some nobility to that, but that's not its purpose. Okay, so we have to sort of abandon our thoughts of that idea of fasting being, making a sort of a sacrifice for God's sake. He doesn't need it, right? Fasting isn't for God's sake, it's for our sake. It's for our development and our growth in our relationship with God. And it's certainly not about just observing every label of every food that we buy. And I'm guilty myself. When you start to take fasting seriously and you go to the store, can I eat this? Does it have dairy? Does it have eggs? And try to avoid that, because that just becomes, well, I want to do it right. And we do want to do it right. But again, what's its purpose? So the purpose is to bring us into the presence of God. So it's inseparable from worship, from our act of coming together and worshiping God. If we don't come to church and we're just fasting, we're missing the whole connection that the church wants us to make. It's connected with scripture, and there's a theology to it that's extremely important, because I've mentioned last week, it helps bring us into this rhythm of preparing ourselves and having a fulfillment in the liturgy, this rhythm of life, right? Our life is nothing but preparation for the next life when Christ returns. And so that rhythm then gets built into our life. So it's assumed that you're embarking upon a spiritual effort of prayer and desire for drawing near to God. That's why we're doing it. Not just because it's something we're supposed to do, but because I'm on a spiritual journey. I want to deepen my faith in God and my relationship with him. And so fasting is just a tool that helps us get there. So I start off with a couple quotes from Father Schmemann, just to sort of frame it, because it's really important to understand what the goal is. So he says, ultimately, to fast means only one thing: to be hungry, to go to the limit of that human condition which depends entirely on food, and being hungry, to discover that this dependency is not the whole truth about man, that hunger itself is first of all a spiritual state, and that it is in its last reality hunger for God. So, in other words, it's meant to allow us in that state of hunger to then not think of how am I going to satisfy this by going to the refrigerator, but my dependency upon God. And he talks about the fall, about Adam and Eve, and how food, the first commandment of God was not to eat of this food. And it's symbolic of finding life apart from God. He's saying, and before that, you could say, before the fall, before Adam and Eve made their sin, we were feasting on the presence of God. In other words, we were fed by his life. The life of God was what sustained us. And the act of eating from creation, instead of creation being a window, a mirror of who God is and his love, it becomes an end in itself. And so we are created this way, and to reorientate ourselves away from the physical nourishment that we all depend upon, and see that as a moment where it can draw us closer to God. And that comes through not just prayer, but prayer opening us up then to pray and to encounter God through prayer. And then to realize something it's hard to experience, that God sustains us. His Spirit sustains us. That's what feeds us. That's what I'm dependent upon. And so by sort of minimalizing our relationship with food, and now we have, incredible Lenten cookbooks, and of course, vegan eating is very popular. So now you got, first-class chefs coming up with the best vegan meal you possibly can come up with. The tradition is, don't even think about it, what you're eating. It's not, don't get consumed with the meal. It's just to sustain you a little bit and to free us up from just focusing on gorging ourselves and finding comfort through the act of eating, and now changing that and focusing our hunger on God and finding the peace and the joy that comes through that connection. There's no heartburn after prayer, right? The fruit of that should be an uplifting of our soul and a freeing of our soul. But it can't get there unless we think of our relationship with food in a very different way. And so, I think it's a little bit, the way Schmemann writes about it, it's like, oh, it's so obvious. Why are we hungry? Why did God create us hungry beings seeking food all the time? Right? So there's a spiritual thing. It's meant to lead us to him. So he also says the purpose of ascetical fasting, which we'll talk about, is this prolonged 40-day fast that we do, is to liberate man from that unlawful tyranny of the flesh, of that surrender of the spirit to the body and its appetites, which is the tragic result of sin in the original fall. It is only through a slow, patient effort that man recovers that he does not live by bread alone, that he restores in himself the primacy of the spirit. So what that means is the church wants us for the great, I'm talking about entering into Great Lent. So there's this whole period of actually starting now, preceding the beginning of Great Lent, that's meant to slowly pull us back to where God is and away from the indulging in worldly things. And so everything's designed, and again, it's connected to worship. It's connected to coming to church and embracing what the church is offering us to free us to see what we can't see otherwise and experience God in a way that we haven't been able to. And then he says the third one is this means that without the corresponding spiritual effort, without feeding ourselves with divine reality, without discovering our total dependence upon God, not our willpower, and God alone, physical fasting would indeed lead to suicide. Should be a lead there. If Christ himself was tempted while fasting, we have not a single chance of avoiding that temptation. Fasting is an art fully mastered by saints. It would be presumptuous and dangerous for us if we attempted that art without discernment and caution. And so feeding ourselves on divine reality, what that's referring to is not just prayer, but the Eucharist, right? So we literally come to church to be fed, okay? So now that becomes the table that we're drawn towards. And now we're being feasting on the life of Christ, literally. And it's always difficult, especially for, I think, catechumens who aren't able to come to the chalice and to try to practice the fast of Great Lent without being able to be fed in the Eucharist and communion. So it's definitely meant to evolve around participating in that sacrament. And we'll get into the connection in more detail in a moment. Questions about those three things? Yeah.
Where it says here, if Christ himself was tempted while fasting, when he went 40 days, wasn't he tempted?
Yeah. Yes. The devil shows up. And so he gives the next 4 or 5 points. He says, so these are the things that we better be mindful of if we're going to participate in fasting. And he says, first, just ask God to help us, to guide us, to direct us, not to just be self-directed when we embark upon the fast. Make it God-centered, right? So we should fast for God's sake. In other words, for the the sake, not that he needs it, but again, for our relationship with him. No other reason. Discover our body as a temple of God's presence. So this is a theme that's going to come up this coming Sunday, that we forget the holiness of a human body. This body is given to us to be the means in which we have communion with God. It is holy. It is a temple. And if we tend to think of the temple as that next downstairs there, next to us, but the temple is here and there, but it's primarily here. And so if we think of ourselves as a temple, it changes how we might think of what we allow our bodies to participate in. So that this is where God wants to dwell, in our heart. Recover the respect of the body in food, the very rhythms of life. We just take food for granted. We do. It's just, life is a vending machine. We just go out and you can choose from 20 different cuisines, and we lose the reverence for what food really is. It's a blessing of God, a means, yes, to sustain us, but it gets placed back in its proper place when we pull back from it controlling us and our spirit primarily leading us, leading the body. The Spirit's called to lead the body to Christ instead of the other way around. The body cannot lead us anywhere other than the body. And all this must be done before you start the fast. So it's interesting in the church calendar. So we had, you might find different jurisdictions treating the order of stuff that leads up to Lent differently. So we had the Sunday of Zacchaeus last Sunday. And the story of Zacchaeus is that for repentance to begin, it has to begin with our desire to change. So Zacchaeus is a man who wants to change. He's encountered Christ somehow, even before he comes to his house. And when Christ sees him, he sees his heart, he sees his intention, and comes to his house. And this man who publicly was just a treacherous thief, makes up for his sin and, gives to the poor. And if he's defrauded, he gives it back 4 times more. So, and Great Lent, generally speaking, is the school of repentance. So before we start the school of repentance, the church lays out for us, what is repentance? What does it look like? So it begins with this desire to want to change, to draw closer to God. And then this coming Sunday is the Canaanite woman. So she's this outsider. And in a sense, we are the outsiders because of our sin. We place ourselves outside of God's presence. And she's desperately seeking God's help for what? For her daughter who's possessed by demons, to be freed of demonic influence. So if we're outside of God, then we're in the devil's hands. That's the teaching of the church. Either we're one or the other. There's no gray in between there. It's either we're in God's hands or we're in the devil's hands. And if we're outside, we're needing to be cleansed, to be freed of that. And then it says, you are the temple, again, of the living God. Make holiness perfect through the fear of God. So again, it's going to remind us of what's coming, what we're doing. We're cleansing our temple. We're cleansing our bodies. We're cleaning house so that Christ can abide and dwell within inside of us. And then comes the 4 Sundays leading up to Lent and what is known as the Triodion. It just means a book of 3 odes, and it summarizes repentance through those main characters, the publican, the Pharisee. We can't repent without humility. The prodigal son realizes that his sin has put him in exile and he has to return to his father. The next Sunday, Judgment Sunday, repentance is fulfilled in love for our neighbor, the sheep and the goats. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. That's the teaching that ultimately, if we are lacking love, then we haven't repented. We haven't become like God. right? That's the whole point of it. And then finally, the last Sunday is called Forgiveness Sunday, where we remember Adam and Eve sitting outside of paradise. It's the beginning of Great Lent, and it's also the end of Great Lent. The idea of being forgiven, because that's our reconciliation with God. That's our union with God. Okay. So the church historically has seen Great Lent as this time for all of us to go back and just rediscover our own baptismal preparation, our own grace that's given to us in baptism, by going back to the school of repentance. Questions on that? Yes.
I have a question, but I don't know if I didn't read it, but I read a couple of times the article in a paragraph of the book. I couldn't understand what fasting had to do, let's say a married man lusts for another woman. Is that kind of tell me just give it up? And it teaches me to give it up, not to do. It says
In the book you're talking about?
yes.
Yeah, he said that certain sins take time to overcome. And I think he was saying that he would recommend to someone struggling with lust to fast, to take on the tool of fasting, so that the body becomes subject to the spirit. Is that what you're referring to?
Maybe I just couldn't understand what it would have to do with.
That there's sin is always a being out of order in self-control. And so if the body is leading the spirit, it will lead it into sin. But if the spirit is leading the body, and the spirit can't lead the body unless it's freed through fasting to be dependent upon God. Because otherwise our spirit's going to be dependent upon food, upon the body. I don't know if that makes sense, but we want to be sustained by the presence of God's grace, and that only comes through prayer and through fasting. Otherwise, we're just going to be the opposite. If that helps or not. And maybe we'll get. There's some other things that will come up here. Any other questions? Yes.
The Canaanite woman, did her daughter have like, she was foaming at the mouth and.
She was just possessed by demons. That was, you're thinking of the son. Yeah.
Okay.
She's the one that she's possessed. She doesn't even bring her, but she asks Christ to heal her. And he says, I can't give this. I only come for the last sheep of the house of Israel. She can't give this grace to an outsider. And she says, yes, but even dogs get the crumbs that fall from the master's table. So that's what it is.
But that young man, it's like disease.
He was possessed. No, the boy was possessed. Was throwing himself into the fire. Epilepsy, or some people think it was. No, it wasn't epilepsy. No, we believe that the devil was alive and well. Can you guys all hear the questions?
No.
No? Oh, you guys can't hear back there. Can you hear on Zoom? No? Yes? Okay. Anyway, she just was clarifying what story it was about.
Yeah, no, we can't hear the questions.
Okay. Well, thank you.
They're breaking up.
Okay. Well, I'll repeat them going forward. Thanks. So prayer, and this is sort of the progression that I mentioned at the beginning, is remembering God, right? Coming into the presence of God. And then fasting is realizing I'm only sustained by God. So not by bread alone. In other words, it's not the food of this life that's sustaining me. It's God's grace that's sustaining me. And that's union with God. And that leads to what? To have love for everyone. For everyone. That's almsgiving. So that's the progression. I think this is Chrysostom. He says, for he that is praying as he ought and fasting has not many wants. And he who does not have many wants cannot be covetous. And he that is not covetous will also be more disposed to almsgiving. So it's a beautiful summary of what this is about. He mentions in the book, well, the money you save from fasting, you should give that to the poor. I could just see it, the accountants in the room going, okay, let me see what that comes to. And okay, then I don't like that transactional kind of idea here. It's about what Chrysostom was saying. It's about changing our heart and its relationship with other people. We should be giving a lot more than just what we're saving by eating bread and crackers. In other words, there might be something much more that we can do for people than just give them bread, give them our attention, give them our help, give them our listening, to be there for people. It's an expanding of our heart, an enlarging of our heart that we're after here. So this is just, you can look up this article. I put it in there and I found it on the internet. This is where all this stuff comes from. So I wanted to develop this because it wasn't in the book, and it's really foundational and we should know it. So what happens biblically with Christ? He's never fasting with his disciples, and he's being criticized for it. He said John, the great and last prophet, and his disciples were all fasting. Why aren't your disciples fasting, right? And so this is his response. He says, can the wedding guests fast as long as the bridegroom is with them? As long as the bridegroom is with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days. So here he's laying this, basically going back to paradise. There was no fasting before the fall because we were sustained by the presence of God, by his love. And so every time, and we just carry this on to what happens after Christ is resurrected, what happens? The church is given the Eucharist. The church is given, the kingdom of God is being inaugurated here on earth through the church. So when we come to church on Sundays, we come to meet the resurrected bridegroom. So Sunday is never a day of fasting. It's always a feast. It's always festal. It's always a celebration because we're with Christ, right? And so that's what he's saying. The Messiah is here, and there's no reason for these disciples of mine to be fasting. So this is the image of the heavenly banquet, right? This wedding banquet of heaven. And remember, just says fasting is impossible in the joy of his presence, being in the joy of the presence of Christ. And fasting then is always an expectation, being in a state of waiting and preparation. Okay, so this is how it connects to worship. And this is just becomes a way of our life. So John, of course, was eating locusts and honey, but he symbolizes, right? He's the last prophet of the Old Testament. So why is he fasting? He's fasting because he's anticipating, he's expecting, he's awaiting for the Messiah to come. He was told that he would know, he would see the Messiah. So his fasting is linked to this waiting expectation of the coming of the Lord, the waiting for his kingdom. And so this goes on. So he says, and it is this scriptural teaching about fast, the Christological messianic context. All that means is this has to do with Christ and him being the Messiah, fasting that defined the place and the function of fasting in the church from the very beginning. But what happens after Christ comes, right? So with the ascension of Christ, with him returning to the heavens, a new period of expectation has begun, that which we live in. And now we are living in expectation of the parousia, or what's known as the second coming of Christ, right? We are awaiting his return. And it's going to either be when I step out that door and I drop dead, there's his return. Or it's going to be from east to west, from no one will miss it. He's going to return and that will be the end of this world. And so we are in that state of waiting upon that return. So Christians are still living in this world. They wait for this parousia. They pray and keep vigil, for they do not know when the Son of Man shall come. And this expectation is expressed, therefore, in a new fasting and a new state of awaiting. Okay. And so this is kind of the mind-blowing part of this. So in the Eucharist, we believe the kingdom has come because when Christ comes to us through the meal, through the bread and the wine, that is his kingdom. But at the same time, the fullness of that kingdom is coming at the second coming. So in other words, we have this paradox of being able to enter the kingdom here and now and get a taste of it, yet fully realizing that it's still yet to come in its fullness. So that's why what he calls in the book a Eucharistic fast, which is essentially a total abstinence of food, is practiced before each liturgy. And so typically this abstinence begins the evening before. So Saturday evening, we would go to bed. We don't wake up Sunday morning and have ham and eggs. We are in expectation of the coming of the Lord. And I think that's also been dropped in most Christian traditions, that there's no sense of this. And it's the same expectation like John, that we are now expecting the return of Christ. And that return happens in the celebration, in the worship, when we come together. Yes.
Does this mean if you have a liturgy on like Tuesday morning, for example, do you?
Yeah, any day of the week it falls outside of Lent. We'll talk about the peculiarities about Lent. But yeah, if he is asking if it's a Tuesday or Wednesday, it doesn't matter. We don't eat anything before we receive communion. Okay. So the Eucharist as a celebration of the presence of Christ in his kingdom, to celebrate a liturgy is to feast. So during the Great Lent, 40 days of fasting, there's a conflict. So pre-sanctified liturgy is introduced as a way to keep the fast and also be sustained by the Eucharist over a prolonged period of time, which is known as an ascetical fast, which he calls that in the book. So, and again, we have to be fed by divine reality. If we're fasting, we need to be fed through the body and blood of Christ. So how do you do that during Great Lent if it's always a feast, right? When we have a liturgy. So pre-sanctified liturgy simply means we take what's been consecrated on Sunday and we consecrate 2 additional lambs, they're called lambs, which become the body of Christ. Those are reserved. And so essentially in the early church, it most likely was a Vespers, evening Vespers service, that they just would give communion out at that Vespers service. But the idea was that you spent the whole day fasting in an absolute fast, preparing to receive Christ at the end of the day, okay? So Vespers, which again, we're just not always aware of these beautiful traditions of our church. Vespers is also symbolic of the end of our life, right? The sun, the darkness comes. And what we do at Vespers is, at the darkness comes, as the day ends, the age ends, Christ comes as the light of the world. The gladsome light of Christ is revealed to us, is given to us. So the idea of an evening worship service is also like thinking in our minds, I'm preparing for my own end, for the day in which the darkness comes, my light goes out, and I come into the presence of Christ. And so what do? We spend the whole day preparing for that liturgy at the end of the day. It's usually about 5 o'clock. And so I tell people, especially if they're new to all of this fasting stuff, if you need something in the morning, that's fine. it needs to be within the fasting, a vegan diet to sustain you. But ideally, you should be able to spend the day thinking about the coming of the Lord in the early evening. So again, that way, our fasting is sustained by our feasting without having a full liturgy and all the resurrectional themes that are on reserved for Saturdays and Sundays. Does that make sense? Yes.
So if you're planning on receiving Holy Communion in pre-sanctified liturgy, technically, what's the fast time then? You just have a light, you were saying you just have a light breakfast and then the rest of the day, because I know in our parish at home, it's always been, they've said, oh yeah, just you can have a light lunch and then after like 1 o'clock, don't have anything to drink or eat.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean.
Yeah, so the question is, when do you start fasting on a Wednesday if you're going to receive communion? Some parishes might say, well, eat light breakfast, light lunch. So the ideal, I'll give you the ideal. The ideal is nothing. Okay, to keep it just like you would a Sunday morning fast. In other words, the first thing you're going to take is going to be the Eucharist, but you're going to know what you're capable of. And if you're getting dizzy or you're passing out, there's nothing wrong with drinking water, by the way. So this doesn't exclude water. You should be hydrated for sure. And especially you should know your own medical conditions. And if you take medications, there's some exceptions here. You need to take them with food. You need to take the proper food for those things. So this was always uncomfortable for some seminarians. Well, what do you mean it's up to each person? Yeah, it's up to each person in the sense that we set the ideal and it's what effort, it's not just what I decide. And that's going back to what Father Schmemann said. Ask God for help in your fast so that you're not totally self-directed. And if it's not sustained by prayer, if prayer is missing, if all we're doing is having this nice vegan diet and losing some pounds, we might obviously physically, you're going to feel better, right? And we might mistake that for, I'm getting more spiritual. No, you're just taking care of your body better. And it's the prayer that's going to bring the joy and the peace of God. That's really what we're after. And so use your own judgment, use what works for you. If you need help, speak to one of the priests. We'll help guide you in that. Okay. So an ascetic fasting as a fight against demonic powers is a method of recovering our true spiritual nature. So going back to Christ's 40-day fast after his baptism is the foundation of this fasting period for us in the church. It means, as we said earlier, that we're going to be tempted. And we're going to see what's weak, what needs healing. Where do I need God's grace in my life? It's meant to expose that, to let ourselves see where we're lacking. What is it that I'm lacking? And so we have to be aware of that. And that means, that's why confession is one of the spiritual tools we'll talk about in another class. Because unless we have that ability to truly be forgiven and cleansed of our mistakes, it can be very difficult to make progress. It's like got to empty the burden of the sins that we're carrying to be free of those. So that might be part of it, is realizing, I need to go to confession. I realize now a bunch of stuff I was either denying or suppressing or not aware of. So Christ does it, and therefore we as a church do it as well. So in the gospel, we find a clear statement that fasting and prayer are the only means for victory over Satan. And again, I think it's the boy, I can't remember the miracle, but the disciples couldn't cast out the demon. And Christ says this can only be cast out by prayer and fasting. It is through food that Satan conquers man and becomes his master. Man has tasted of the forbidden fruit, and in doing so, he's become enslaved to food so that his whole existence depends upon it. By fasting, by refusing voluntarily food, man discovers that he lives not by bread alone, but by the grace of God. And then fasting becomes the denial of what has become necessary, right? The real mortification or the real dying to the flesh, which depends entirely and exclusively on the inescapable laws of nature. In fast, man reaches that freedom which he lost in sin. So in a sense, we all are enslaved to food. That's essentially what it's saying. And we are meant to be enslaved to God and have him as that which sustains us. And then if one is hungry and then discovers that he can truly be independent of that hunger, not be destroyed by it, but just on the contrary, can transform it into a source of spiritual power and victory, then nothing remains of the great lie. Depend on bread alone, I can have life apart from God, in which we have been living since Adam. So that's the whole point of it, to be freed of that. So I'm going to get now into some guidelines, but before I get there, it's like kind of glossed over the chapter. Are there any particular questions you had? Hopefully I gave you the right reading assignment. Next week, read chapter on almsgiving.
Father, was John the Baptist then the first one to start with fasting?
No, fasting was practiced by Jews historically in the Old Testament. Yeah, they just didn't know why, or it wasn't in the right way, right? The Pharisee says, "I fast twice a week. I give alms. I do all these great things," but he's what? He's full of pride. Yeah. So the fasting was not as John the Baptist was in expectation, and the great prophets Isaiah. He says, "Is not this the fast that I choose, that you free those in prison, that you tend to the orphan and the widow?" That the fast is meant to be spiritual, not as a law that has no meaning.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So some guidelines then. Liturgical fasting, as he mentions in the book, is a total absence from food before every Eucharist. It's interesting that the early church had a name for that, and they called it statio. It was a military term of being in a state of alarm and mobilization. So the church is on watch, awaiting joyfully the coming of the bridegroom in the Eucharist, and of course at the end of time. So this is what the church does as a whole. In other words, that's just a given. That's not optional. Again, there's exceptions because of medications and age and things, but otherwise, that's what the church does. It is in expectation. We are the body of Christ on earth. We are the revelation of his kingdom on earth. And so we are the ones awaiting his return. And every time we celebrate a liturgy, we are in that state of expectation of the coming of the Lord. So time, and this is it's important because everything has changed because of what Christ has done, because of his being raised from the dead and his inaugurating his kingdom through the church. It changes how we look at time and how we look at our time on earth. And so eternity is a sanctification of time. It does not empty or make absurd and meaningless either time or our life in time, but on the contrary, gives them all their weight, all the real value. The church fills with an eternal truth, with reality, which she alone possesses, an apparently meaningless flow of time. The rhythm of the church, the rhythm of the Eucharist, which comes and is always to come, fills everything with meaning, puts all things to their real place. So in other words, the days of the week now become referenced to what's happened through what Christ has done. So the Wednesday fasting and the Friday fasting now become attached to his betrayal and to his crucifixion. And yes, on a kind of a rudimentary way, you can say that I am thinking of how have I betrayed Christ? May I not give you a kiss as did Judas? We say that every time when? Before we receive communion. Have I betrayed Christ? I'm receiving him in the sacrament. Have I betrayed him? And on Fridays, we were remembering that he was crucified. He gave his life for the life of the world. Have I crucified my flesh? Have I truly repented? And am I being filled with the life of Christ? And so even the days of the week then become sanctified, have meaning to them. And again, it's all related to what? The kingdom on Sunday, the coming to the worship of liturgy on Sundays. So we talked about Saturday evening, but Sunday then becomes known as the 8th day, the day beyond time. So the day of the kingdom, it's not 7 is how we measure days of the week. Our time is measured by sevens. So the day after the 7th day after the time of this world is the time of God's kingdom. So even in Greek, it's Kyriaki imera, it means the Lord's day. We call Sunday the Lord's day. And even every day of the week then becomes connected to the worship of our church. And essentially during every Wednesday, every Friday throughout the year, there should be no meat or dairy. And, again, if it's not connected to our spiritual effort of prayer, it has no meaning. So, it's much more difficult to keep the fast outside of Lent during every Wednesday and Friday of the year. But it becomes a way I'm preparing. What am I doing? I'm preparing myself for the liturgy that's going to come. And that's part of my preparation. So on Wednesdays and Fridays, I might spend more time in prayer. I might spend more time in scripture. I might spend more time in reaching out and helping people. That those become days in which I'm more intentional about what I'm doing in preparing myself. There's prayers of preparation for communion. You can find them in almost any prayer book. They would be good to say some of them on Wednesday and Friday, anticipating that I'm going to come to Sunday and receive communion. I think the biggest shortcoming, the greatest thing that's happened is we got great Sunday attendance. The concern is, though, are we preparing properly for that frequent communion that has now become the norm? In the old days, that wasn't the norm. You only received communion a couple times out of the year, special feast days at Easter. But when you're taking communion frequently, when it becomes something that sustains us spiritually, we have to be vigilant about it and be preparing for it. And sometimes we do a great job and sometimes we do a lousy job, but it's meant to be there. He talks about the 4 periods of these fasting periods. Great Lent before Easter, the Christmas fast, the fast of the apostles, and then the 14-day fast of August. And it was historically, most likely there were pre-sanctified liturgies during all of these times, but today the only time we have pre-sanctified liturgy is during Great Lent. And I couldn't tell you the reason, but anyway, historically that's what was happening. So here's some guidelines. I believe some of this was taken from Callistos, where one of his books has a nice treatment of fasting. I think it's, I can't remember which book it is. It might be his Lenten Triodion. Yeah, the beginning, you get the Lenten Triodion book. It's the book of the 3 odes that I mentioned, has all the hymns of all the services during Great Lent. He has a nice introduction. So limiting the number of meals per day, that's become fashionable now. You skip a meal, but limit the number. Maybe you're going to eat less frequently. Quantity, right? So you should be able to eat and then feel like you can get up and pray and not pass out on the couch. Okay. Don't want to pass out on the couch. Total fast is practice. We talked about the pre-sanctified on Wednesdays and Fridays. On Fridays, we do it, the pre-sanctified liturgy in the morning. And the reason is because we have the akathist hymn in the evening that the Greek churches do. The Russians don't do the akathist, and so they would have an evening liturgy on Fridays. But we do it Friday morning, so you just keep the same fast the evening before, not to eat anything until you receive communion. And then elimination of certain types of food. It is a strict non-dairy vegetarian or vegan diet. So no meat of any kind, no dairy products, no seafood with blood, fish, in other words, but crustaceans. So shrimp, crawfish, crab, lobster, squid, octopus, all the things that cost lots of money. So I won't get into why, but anyway, you can, yes, we shouldn't be having lobster meals and crab throughout Lent, defeating our purpose, right? These are things, if you need protein, again, we set the ideal, that's the ideal. And some people can't go without dairy for that long. Some people can't go without an animal protein. And so do what you need to do. But the ideal is always what we would hope everyone try to do. It's an art, it takes practice, it takes time, and guidance. So that's essentially what it is. Always be able to get up from the table, ready for prayer. Pregnant or nursing women don't have to fast. They obviously they're sustaining a child, and I'll never forget doing a barbecue one time when I was at the seminary, and all these pregnant seminarian wives couldn't wait for the ribs to be plated, so that the calories that a pregnant woman burns are enormous. So anyway, but if you can fast and be fine, great. But again, you have to take some common sense here with what you're doing. Any health-related issues, like I mentioned, medications or needing certain dietary things, those take precedence over keeping a fast. If it might be harmful in some way, it depends on the person. Who knows what might not be healthy for someone to do. And very young children, and I kind of leave it to parents to decide at what age they feel their children should start fasting. I think they certainly should talk about it with their kids, about what it means, and get back to what's been presented here tonight. It's really not about a Christian diet. It's about spending more time in prayer, spending more time as a family, spending more time talking, sharing, caring, doing those type of things in the home. Sometimes it's hard to get kids to eat at all. So you don't want to introduce fasting. They're already fasting. And so here are some sort of what to expect coming up, some dates just to be aware of. So because of what the Pharisee said, I fast twice a week, and he's full of pride. There's no fasting on the week following February 5th on Wednesday and Friday. You can get your hamburger, whatever. Then fasting from meat Fair Sunday is the Judgment Sunday and the 19th. So that's where we actually begin fasting from meat during Great Lent, not on Clean Monday. So the church slowly introduces fasting to us to help us make the transition. So meat Fair Sunday, I always like to think of my yaya would go through the house. She was so pious about this. She would go and wash any pots that she cooked meat in. That's what it meant to her. Like, I don't want even to use these pots. Don't go there. But but it's a day in which we are technically beginning that fast from meat. And then the week before Lent, There's cheese fair, eggs and cheese and other dairy products are permitted on Wednesday and Friday, the week before Lent. And then on Cheese Fair Sunday, Forgiveness Sunday is the last day for dairy products. That evening, Lent actually begins with a Vesper service. So that's Clean Monday, known as Clean Monday, the first Monday of Lent. That's when Lent begins. And the week after Easter, after Pascha, there's no fasting. So we take a break from fasting during that time. And, you know, I would say, especially if you're new to fasting, the first week of Lent and Holy Week are especially times in which we should try to be as strict as possible. I think the first week of Lent, I really tell people it's sort of like boot camp. There's services every morning and every evening. And if you just embrace it and come to those services, you're going to get in the right frame of mind for the rest of Lent. And there's pre-sanctified liturgy. I think we actually do it 2 or 3 times that week. And then these are the things that part of the vegan diet: bread, vegetable soup, tofu, fruits, nuts, bread, hummus, pretty much anything that you can eat that isn't meat or dairy related. Not allowed during Lent: meat, poultry, fish, dairy products, cheese, butter, eggs, alcohol. Feast of Annunciation, there's always a lifting of that. Fish and wine are allowed, and also on Palm Sunday before Holy Week begins. Sorry, there's a lot to throw at you. Yes.
Shellfish? I always thought it's a fish, but apparently it isn't.
No, crustaceans.
Yeah. So that can be,
Yeah, shrimp, lobster,
I see.
calamari, squid.
Yeah.
Used to be cheap, not cheap anymore. Squid used to be cheap.
Coffee without milk.
Coffee's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, without milk. Yeah. Again, unless you have a problem with caffeine, unless caffeine is like you're addicted to it. Guilty. Yes.
A little about being in situations when non-Orthodox people are operating.
Mhm. So if you're invited to someone's home and they're not Orthodox and it's during Lent and they offer you meat, what do you do? And the teaching is that you would be more offensive to the host not to not eat it. They prepare a meal. It's like refusing their hospitality. So again, it's not about the law. It's the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. That's important. And you might find even at church, and we'll have some potluck dinners on Wednesday nights. We're going to do that. Pre-sanctified liturgy, potluck dinner in the hall. And some people may cook with oil. Some people may put something out there that maybe there's some dairy. That's okay. I mean, it's eat what you can, choose what you're going to have, and not draw too much attention to ourselves in doing that. Yeah, good question.
This class has made me hungry.
Hopefully hungry for God. Yes.
Well, is that very similar to Thanksgiving, that you eat turkey in America that
Yeah.
in the middle of the Christmas fast, and
Yeah.
an exception for it was everybody had turkey.
Yeah. Culturally, the question is about the fast, the 40 days before Christmas. Culturally, this fast has been very difficult because of our culture. I mean, there's office parties, there's gatherings, there's Thanksgiving. No one is telling people to have herring on Thanksgiving and do away with the turkey. That's not at all. And in fact, the 12 days before Christmas, we should at least honor that. There should be no weddings from December 12th to Christmas. So keep that in mind. It's not a feasting time. And that's kind of where our church has said, this is the line that we're going to draw. And to do your best, during the holidays, not to overindulge. We should always be living this way and not overindulging. That's the point of fasting, so that it becomes a state of how I'm going to live my life. And especially, it doesn't mean when Easter does come, we're going to get drunk and get, drink and eat everything we want to eat. It's like, well, why did you just go through everything we just went through? We should be sober in our approach, but we should have a right relationship with the food and with alcohol and with everything in our life. It should be balanced in the right way. Yeah. Other questions? Anyone in Zoom land have questions? Was there
I have
any
a question.
chat? Yes.
I have a
go ahead.
question, Father. It's Dee.
Hi, Dee.
Could you explain Clean Monday? Is that like, since fasting starts from the day before, Clean Monday, is there something extra we're supposed to do on Clean Monday?
Well, that's what I was saying. The first week of Lent, we should be severe with our fasting as much as possible. So, Clean Monday should be a day that we really spend time. I will try not to have any appointments the first week of Lent. And I'll tell people too, a lot of people want to sign up for confession. I say, spend the first week going to services and then see me for confession the second week or the third or the fourth or the fifth. But it's like a spiritual retreat that you can go on. And I didn't even talk about the other type of things we should be fasting from, which are like, the Late Show and Great Lent don't always go together. In other words, what we're allowing ourselves to watch on TV or our social media stuff, all of that should be part of the fast, not just food. It has to be a complete, okay, these are things that are really distracting for me. And to go down to the bookstore, get a book on prayer, get a book on the lives of the saints and be fed this way. And again, as we do this collectively, as the whole church fasts, there's a grace that we all get to sort of bathe in that helps us. It's like God's this incredible parent that wants us to do well, wants us to grow in our relationship with him. And so he helps us. He actually will give us a little boost at the beginning to get a taste of what this is like. And then he'll pull back and say, okay, now do you really just love me because you love me without all these wonderful gifts that I'm giving you? So that will happen too. But it's a process. And that first week is just the beginning of that. And the service at night is the St. Mary of Egypt, the great canon of repentance. And it's a compline service that is basically listening to an hour or so of a confession. And it's good to read these prayers of the saints to hear how they saw themselves in the presence of God. It's so refreshing because they're so human. But they confess it all. And it's very bold how they speak in their prayers. And so the hymnology of the church encapsulates all of that. And it's just, this is me confessing all the things that I know I've fallen short of. And so again, the church intentionally wants us to slow down, to listen, to detach from the world, and to embrace what the church has for us. Other questions? Comments? Yes.
I read that it was olive oil. You say olive oil. Olive oil?
Well, in the ancient world, they only had one kind of oil.
Okay.
It was olive oil. So if you can, it's a fat. It's a luxury in a sense. And I'm a chef, and chef. Can you cook without oil? Yeah, you can cook without oil. We don't think we can, but we can. And it's actually really good for you to abstain from that oil for a while. So it's, again, to not think about too much of there are two kind of gluttons. One is the one who is about the taste, and the other is about the quantity. So gluttony can take either form. Both are not good. For me, I'm guilty of both. But it's not about because boy, you can make really great vegan food, and what am I doing? I'm focusing on food. I'm not focusing on my prayer life. I'm not focusing on the other person that I should be serving in some way. That's what it's meant to bring us. Okay. All right. Any other questions on Zoom land? We have 20 people in Zoom tonight. God bless you all. Next week, it will be on almsgiving. So sorry about the out of order. So read the almsgiving chapter. And Father Jacob doesn't know it yet, but he'll be teaching a class. My son's in a play and I got to go see him next Tuesday night. So with that, let's end with a prayer and then through the prayers of our Holy Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy upon us and save us. Amen. Okay.